Paul Antonopoulos, editor of Greek City Times, Europe, has greatly suffered because of illegal immigration. The topic for the special address is how illegal immigration is compromising Europe's internal security.
Firstly, thank you for kindly inviting me to speak at this dialogue about how illegal immigration has, and is completely affecting Europe, compromising Europe's internal security, an issue certainly seemingly far away from what the honourable veterans and the esteemed academics have spoken about today. So once again, thank you for providing me with this unique opportunity for me to discuss about this European issue. This European issue, it's got elements of clashes of civilizations, coercions, and hybrid warfare. When the migration crisis started in Europe in 2015, international media was inundated with shocking images of children in the Aegean Sea being drowned, going from Turkey, attempting to enter the European Union via Greece. We also saw shocking images of families boarding ships, or ships is actually an exaggeration, dinghies more like it, trying to get from Libya into Italy, and so on and so forth. All these shocking images and videos were accompanied with horrific stories from the migrants explaining the reasons why they had to flee their homelands or why they were trying to reach Europe. They also discussed about the treatment and the experiences they had, which was overwhelmingly negative in their attempts to reach Europe. This, of course, provoked severe emotional responses among European people, many who already have a propensity towards a saviour complex, the main reason being the legacy of colonialism and the proselytization, the nature of proselytization amongst Christianity. This, of course, is well intended. There's absolutely no doubt about that. Who would actually argue against such a thing? However, of course, blindly opening your borders with many of the migrants just simply throwing away their identity cards as they're on ships trying to reach Europe. We don't know who these people are, and naturally that, of course, creates a security issue within Europe. We saw on television scenes of hordes of young men walking their way across the Balkans to reach the richer countries of Western Europe and Northern Europe. This was seen all over the world, and I'm sure in India too. Unsurprisingly, though, amongst those young men were members of Islamic State, Al-Qaeda, and other jihadist Islamist organizations. Since the migration crisis in Europe began in 2015, waves of terrorist attacks have ripped all across Europe: UK, France, Germany, Belgium. And in fact, Belgium, there was a stabbing against a police officer that's being investigated as a terrorist attack just a couple of days ago. In addition, there has been a massive spike of rapes and sexual assaults with the 2015-2016 New Year's Eve celebrations seeing 1,200 women sexually assaulted in Germany on a single night. These were mostly of men of non-European origin who had just recently arrived in Europe. This raises the question, though, why did this migrant crisis begin in 2015, which, mind you, was originally and falsely called the Syrian refugee crisis? It must be noted, though, the Syrian war began in 2011. So again, why would this crisis suddenly begin in 2015 specifically? Now, as cliche as it sounds, I know this is a really complex answer to get around. And it should not be viewed as a single phenomenon, since migrants have been continuously entering Europe since 2015, either from Morocco into Spain, into Italy from Libya, or into Greece from Turkey. The overwhelming majority of migrants, and therefore the most documented and reported migrant flows, were from Turkey into Greece. A Greece which we must keep in mind in 2015, and I'm sure all of you remember, was in the middle of an intense and infamous economic crisis. Although the commonly held belief is that most migrants were Syrian, data actually shows that the number of illegal immigrants from Syria into Greece was actually quite minor, and that the collective numbers of Iranians, Pakistanis, Afghanis, Africans, Iranians collectively numbered more than the Syrians that actually entered Greece. As we know, Iran, for example, is not in war, so there shouldn't be any refugees from Iran entering Greece. It is recorded that in 2015, the Islamic State was at the peak of their power, while at the same time, the Europeans were at the peak of promoting their open border ideology. Effectively, this created the perfect conditions for illegal immigrants from Iran, Afghanistan, and believe it or not, even Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Africa to claim that they were Syrian refugees, wanting to enter Europe to escape war. And as I said, this was despite them having no documents to prove that they were Syrian. And later on, we would discover in Greece that they were actually from Iran, Afghanistan, Pakistan, etc. In this sense, many of the affluent countries of the European Union, such as Germany, Sweden, etc., were very ideologically driven. As I mentioned, they had a savior complex to save Syrians from jihadist groups and their own president, Bashar al-Assad. As said, although well-intended, it is of course reckless. It is a reckless policy to allow hundreds of thousands of undocumented people, mostly men, to enter Europe. And it is specifically for this reason that Europeans today are suffering from jihadist attacks, as well as a shocking spike in sexual assaults. However, today I don't want to exclusively focus on the repercussions of Europe's reckless policy, as a spike in radical Islamic terrorism in Europe is very well documented and has been analysed over and over again for years. In fact, it is these spikes in criminality that has seen a recent arrival of conservative governments into Greece, Italy, Sweden, and elsewhere in Europe. Instead, what I will explore further, which is severely understudied and discussed, is how the migrant crisis is actually a manufactured calamity orchestrated by Turkey to extort money from the Europeans and to severely pressure its historic and traditional enemy, Greece. Most people are unaware that during the 1990s, the then president of Turkey, Turgut Özal, provocatively boasted, "We do not need to go to war with Greece. We just need to send them a few million immigrants and be finished with Greece." So that's 3 decades ago. The then president of Turkey himself admitted that they could use migrants to severely pressure Greece, something that Turkey has done with resounding success over the last few years. Although Greece has not suffered from the wave of terrorism that has gripped all across Western Europe, there has been an establishment of a mostly male Turkophile Pakistani community numbering well over 100,000 individuals. A very significant amount when we consider that Greece is only a country of 10.3, 10.4 million people. So the overwhelming majority of migrants that illegally entered the European Union came to Greece via Turkey before moving onwards to their final destinations, usually the UK, Germany, Sweden, and other well-developed European countries. However, by a European Union policy, migrants wanting to reach Western Europe through official channels, once having illegally entered Greece, would then have to be hosted in Greece until their application process is accepted or denied. In this way, Afghani and Pakistani communities have developed in my home country of Greece, and as said, they are overwhelmingly friendly to Turkey. A Turkey which has been seriously challenging the sovereignty of the Greek islands over the last few years, on a daily basis has been using jets and drones to penetrate Greek airspace and challenges Greece's maritime sovereignty, which is rich in resources. So Mustafa Kemal Ataturk, he founded the Republic of Turkey after the collapse of the Ottoman Empire in 1923. He was a perpetrator of genocide in which 3 million Christians, mostly Greeks, Armenians, and Assyrians, were systemically massacred. His drive for a so-called Turkey for the Turks actually ideologically inspired Muhammad Ali Jinnah's pursuit for a Muslim state in the Indian subcontinent. Jinnah once said that Mustafa Kemal Ataturk was the foremost figure in the Muslim East, in Iran and Afghanistan, in Egypt, and of course in Turkey. He demonstrated to the consternation of the rest of the world that Muslim nations were coming into their own. In Kemal Ataturk, the Islamic world has lost a great hero. What Jinnah also said is that Ataturk is an inspiration for Indian Muslims to carve out a country for themselves. Given that Ali Jinnah was ideologically inspired by Ataturk, it is no surprise that today Pakistan and Turkey have commonalities and even describe themselves, along with Azerbaijan, as brotherly countries. Although Greece has not experienced terrorist attacks like those that have torn across Europe, the existence of a large and exclusively male Pakistani community is effectively a dormant security threat that Turkey is able to activate at any time, and they will surely activate this dormant threat in any future conflict between Greece and Turkey. So in this way, we can see that at least Greece's internal security is severely compromised. Frustrated with Europe's support for the Kurdish people's defense units in Syria, more commonly known as the YPG, and our partners with the separatist Kurdish forces in Turkey, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan unleashed millions of migrants and refugees onto Greece's borders in 2015, with these migrants being encouraged by the wealthier European countries to travel into Greece, travel across the Balkans, and come to their countries. And it is here where we see the ideological differences between the wealthier countries of Europe, which reside within the safety of the interior of the European continent, and the frontline European states such as Greece. Greece today is a migrant frontline state for the European Union. Historically, though, the Greek-speaking Byzantine Empire, or the Eastern Roman Empire, was Europe's frontline to conquerors when they began expanding out of the Arab Peninsula. And before the Arabs began conquering outside of the peninsula, the Greeks were Europe's frontline state against the Zoroastrians and the expansionist Iranian kingdoms. Greeks, unlike most other Europeans, also have the historical memory of being occupied, colonized, and drained by the Ottoman Turks for about 400 to 500 years. It is this historical memory, which Western and Northern Europeans do not have, that makes the Greeks especially concerned about the emergence of Turkophile communities emerging, basically from these illegal immigrants settling into Greece, overwhelmingly Pakistani. Many European and British reactionaries, right-wing journalists and commentators, however you want to term them, describe the migrant crisis as an Islamic invasion. I would say this is extremely limited and does not explain why the overwhelming majority of migrants to Europe enter Europe via Greece, especially when there are alternative routes to enter to enter the European Union, such as Bulgaria, which also directly borders Turkey. Rather, migrants are weaponized by Turkey to extort money from the European Union under the guise of refugee assistance. At the same time, though, Turkey is attempting to engineer a minor demographic change in Greece by implanting a Turkophile community, which on any whim can be activated by Erdogan to cause whatever chaos they might want to. This may sound reactionary, but the fact is that the Greeks have lived under repressive and genocidal Turkish rule for nearly half a millennium, and it is for this reason that Greeks are uneasy about having a large Muslim Turkophile community and have major security concerns with this. It must be stressed that the Republic of Turkey, since its foundation under Ataturk, and not since Erdogan came to power in 2003, has been pursuing neo-Ottoman policies. Turkey annexed what it calls today its Hatay province from Syria in 1939. It invaded northern Cyprus in 1974. It currently occupies large areas of northern Syria and Iraq and had a decisive role in Azerbaijan's 2020 military invasion of the indigenously Armenian Nagorno-Karabakh region. Therefore, Turkey has always been willing to territorially expand and further its interest and influence. It has successfully conjured soft power through a variety of methods, such as TV series, many which were actually quite popular in Pakistan, such as Ötügürü. Many describe the European migrant crisis as one of Islamic conquest, but admit, likely out of naivety, as one that's being directly orchestrated by Turkey, and other Muslim countries should not be lumped under the actions of Turkey. It is recorded that even in 2020, a few years after the peak of the migration crisis, tens of thousands of refugees gathered at the Greece-Turkey border after Erdogan said he would, quote unquote, open the gates to Europe. This was in reaction to the death of 33 Turkish soldiers in Syria's Idlib province and was designed to exert pressure on the European Union and NATO to support its military operation in northern Syria. In speaking about the European Union, Erdogan stated in March 2020, "The Europeans say, do not open the gates for the migrants. I told them months ago that if you do not share this burden with us, we will open the gates." Effectively, Erdogan is directly telling us himself how he weaponizes the flows of migrants to manipulate Europe. This migrant crisis is not one that was aimless or spontaneous, but rather it was systemically and well organized by Turkey. This does not mean that there weren't legitimate refugees, but it does not mean we cannot ignore the uncomfortable truth. Although flows have significantly slowed down after Greece recognized Turkey as a safe country, meaning that migrants cannot seek asylum in Greece anymore if they entered from Turkey, the repercussions of many years of inaction means that an or-near male population of Turkophile Pakistanis now exist in Greece. Turkey's policy is and always was twofold, as already mentioned, to create security issues for Greece and to extort money from Europe. And the knock-on effects is obviously the spike in terrorist attacks, with the latest incident happening in the last few days in Belgium. As already said, although Greece has been exempted from this wave of terrorism that has gripped Europe, there is little doubt that dormant terrorist threats are waiting to be activated on Turkey's orders, such as in the event of a Greece and Turkey war. So although I'm mostly focused on my own home country, it is because Greece is the frontline state of all of Europe, just as it has been all throughout history. In effect, Greece has been the country most affected in Europe by the migrant crisis, which only further compounded the severe economic crisis the country was experiencing at the time. Unfortunately, what Greece could not control is Turkey's weaponization as a tool of pressure, or that Europe would be actively encouraging illegal migration into Europe. Thank you for your time today, and I'll happily answer any questions.
I just want to ask you, Gaddafi also very often spoke about weaponizing immigrants and affecting demographic change in Europe. How many and Libya was one of the very big sources of a refugee inflow. What actual proof do we have of Turkey sort of creating these situations in Syria which would facilitate refugee flows and things like that, number one. And part two, if a lot of these immigrants did not end up in Greece, they would stay back in Turkey, which would be quite destabilizing for Turkey. So how do you actually construct a sort of proof that it is actually deliberate policy?
I mentioned what Erdogan said in 2020 when he conjured a new migration crisis at the border between Greece and Turkey, and he openly said that if you don't support our operation against the Kurds in northern Syria, we're opening up the gates to Europe. And he attempted that, but thankfully the Greek government was strong enough to completely rebound that effort. What I would say is that Turkey itself has created this migration problem for itself. They're the ones who financed, funded, armed, trained all the jihadists in Syria. So they helped create the very conditions for Syria to be destabilized and to end up in an intense civil war, thus forcing many, many people to leave. So Turkey itself created their own refugee crisis mess that is now trying to push onto Greece for the multiple reasons that I've already mentioned. And just to stress again that in the early 1990s, the then Turkish president, Turgut Özal, directly said that we don't need to go to war with Greece, we just got to send them millions of refugees. And it is a major security concern because, as I said, Greece is only a country of 10.4 million people. We've got limited resources. We're just emerging out of a major economic crisis, which was compounded by having to deal with the Turkish instigated migrant crisis. So in that sense, I would say it's Turkey's problem to deal with. But unfortunately for us, it's becomes Europe's problem as well.
Thank you, Mr. Paul.